then we start seeing the tether or the pole doing this.
Uh-oh.
And he says, finally it pulls it over and destroys this car into the wall. And there's this 11-year-old Vic Jr. looking at this car that's in a pile.
His race car, yeah, this is destroyed.
But
that's funny.
The first time that they put it in the V860 engine on the dyno, it pinned the dyno, 200 horsepower. So they're going, oh, that was easy. We got this, no problem.
Yeah.
So they go to idle the thing down. Well, the percentage of nitro so high, they can't shut it off.
Yeah.
They're throwing wet towels on top of the engine.
Hey, welcome to Car Guy Confessions, brought to you by ARP. I'm Jeff Smith. This is my car buddy Cam Benty and car builder Steve Strope, and we're going to tell you some stories.
All right, welcome to another episode of Car Guy Confessions with Jeff Smith. We have a special brought to you by the guys from ARP-bolts.com. Our friends at ARP, we couldn't do this without them. So we have a special show today. I have two good friends here, Mike Eddy and Smitty from Edelbrock. And there was actually a time where I was spending so much time down at Edelbrock that people thought that I had my own time card.
We were looking for your badge.
and I have a couple of those visitors badges still that I walked off with a couple of times. So Perfect. That was fun. So my deal with you guys goes all the way back to almost the very beginning when I started at Carcraft in 1979. And Jim McFarland was there. And I used to call him all the time with tech questions, right? And finally he would say, dude, just save them up and come down here on Friday afternoon. It's kind of a slow time, Friday afternoon. It was still at Carroll Circle. And save your questions up. And it's not there anymore. Yeah.
No, Vic's not here.
Well, now Vic's not here.
Yeah. On Friday afternoon.
Yeah. So it's a lot quieter. Yes. So I would go down there, and then I think to this day that, every Friday afternoon I would go down there. Wow. And sometimes I'd be down there till 7, 8 o'clock at night. We'd be the only ones there. And we'd close the place up and go home. And I honestly still think to this day that my first wife thought I was cheating on her, that I was with somebody every Friday night. And I said, no, I'm with Jim McFarland. Call the company, And then I thought, no, we're not going to answer the phone, right? So, but that was a lot of fun. So that's how I met these guys. So, tell me a little bit about. We'll start with you, and then we'll kick Mike in on this deal too. So when did you start at Edelbrock?
Just 30-some years ago.
30 years ago.
But I've been associated with Edelbrock since 1970.
Okay. I
worked at a speed shop out of high school.
Uh-huh.
I used to call Edelbrock in El Segundo.
Mm-hmm.
I still got the number, 310-320-7310 in my head. And
permanently emblazoned.
But I used to talk to, back then it was John Toll and all those guys in sales. And then I went to Service Center Speed Shop. Mm-hmm. From that previous speed shop, and that's when I met Mike Eddy.
Uh-huh.
We reminisce on the way up here, 1972.
Wow.
So that's 50 years ago.
Yeah.
But I've been doing this performance aftermarket industry my whole life.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I've had a passion. It's like, I had a go-kart when I was 5. I just love cars.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
We all love cars.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
Been with Edelbrock for 30-plus years, and just doing what we love to do. Every day.
And recently they just packed up and moved to Mississippi, basically, with the holding company merged with Compcams.
Compcams, we're now called the Edelbrock Group.
The Edelbrock Group, yep.
And we moved from Torrance, California, after 32 years to Olive Branch, Mississippi.
Yeah.
And that was last March, April.
Uh-huh.
So it's been a transition, to say the least. And COVID in the middle and the pandemic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just...
But the foundry is still out in the desert.
Foundry's still in San Jacinto.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Permanent mold and
right.
And green
still
sand.
Made in USA.
Yes,
right?
sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
There you go.
Casting so made.
So Mike, when did you start? Because you guys were already there when I started, so I'm kind of a newcomer.
Well,
to this
he was.
Well, I went to work for the company in '86 in January, and prior to that, my best friend that I grew up and did car stuff with, one heavy Kurt Hooker. Through him, they didn't have any vehicle maintenance or anything in El Segundo.
Okay.
So I had a repair shop with my dad, and I worked on some of Vic's cars there. And my dad wanted to retire, and Vic says, well, why don't you just come to work for me?
Yeah.
And the only difference was I worked about the same hours, but I didn't have quarterly taxes. That was taken care of. So January of '86, but I worked on the company stuff since like 80, 81. So,
yeah. Okay. Right.
But yeah, saw a few different things. Worked at El Segundo, and then worked at Torrance. And
and the fun part really was the race cars, right?
Oh yeah. See, I look at Mike like Bobby Meeks was for Vic Sr.
Okay.
Because he was the Bobby Meeks, if you will, for Vic Jr. He was Mike Eddy that took care of Vic. You know, it was just because those two guys, Bobby Meeks and Mike Eddy, they were the right-hand man for Vic Sr. and Jr.
Right.
You know?
In fact, if you're really interested in the history, there's a great book.
Made in USA.
Made in USA, and it's a fantastic book. And as soon as it came out, I went to the book signing party and stuff, and it was great. It was a lot of fun, and met some of those guys that had already retired when I started coming down there, just hanging out and doing stories. And it's an amazing book. And one of my favorite stories is about Vic Sr. racing the V860 with the midgets. Yeah. And so at one point they wanted to induct Vic Sr. into the Hall of Fame in Novi. And my good friend John Asher that I worked with at Carcraft Magazine, he wrote a lot of the introductions, of the short little piece that they would put in the museum, and they wanted him to write it. So he called me and said, I don't know anything about Vic Sr., so you have to do this. Holy crap, right? You know? and you've got 3 paragraphs. How do you encapsulate that man's history in 3 paragraphs? It's impossible.
No kidding.
So I was really stressing out, and I finally realized that after having read the book, that there's a great little vignette about what they did with nitromethane with the sprint with the midget car
right after World War II.
Right after World War II. So they were out at the speedway, and the way I understand it, the Offies were in a separate class in the V860s because they were a pure race engine, and the V860 was the Ford Flathead, right?
Right.
So so Vic Sr. decided to race against the Offies that night, the race engines, because they were running on nitromethane. They were running something like, 70, 80% nitromethane, and nobody knew what it was. Yeah. Nobody. It was a rocket fuel. It was actually, from what I heard, the Bean Bandits were the first ones that actually ran it out the dry lakes because they were introduced through Jet Propulsion Lab.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's where they found, because we're using it sort of as a rocket fuel. So so the story goes that they put the nitromethane in the midget in the V860s and beat the Offies.
The one and only true story at Gilmore Stadium.
Gilmore Stadium.
Yes, sir.
That was right after World War II. They had, crowds of 90, 100,000 people.
Yeah, because it was a huge deal.
The Rose Bowl and all these other
and
venues.
Everybody's eyes are watering, and it smells nasty, and so what are you guys doing? There's such a great story.
The blue flame out the little V860 pipe was like this long.
Sure.
We heard stories. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Yeah, but they also blew up a bunch of flatheads in the process of figuring out how to make it work. So
the first time that they ran it on the engine dyno, they had the first Clayton dyno west of the Mississippi, and they found it. Vic Jr. had a Tether car. Mm-hmm. And that's what they used to power it with.
Oh, okay.
But you were supposed to mix it in a percentage.
Right,
going, well,
right.
If it's good for that, it's good for this. So
let's mix it up.
Anyway, they overloaded the mixture in the Tether car, and in the back alley of the shop, they drive a stake in the ground and they get the thing running. Well, it's so overloaded with nitro that it's sputtering and popping and barely making revolutions, and then gradually it gets faster and faster and faster. This is a story via Bobby Meeks. So he says after a little while, he says, it's a blur. You can't see anything. And he says, then we start seeing the tether or the pole doing this.
Uh-oh.
And he says, finally it pulls it over and destroys this car into the wall. And there's this 11-year-old Vic Jr. looking at this car that's in a pile.
His race car, this is destroyed.
But
that's funny.
The first time that they put it in the V860 engine on the dyno, it pinned the dyno, 200 horsepower. So they're going, that was easy. We got this, no problem. Yeah. So they go to idle the thing down. Well, the percentage of nitro is so high, they can't shut it off.
Yeah.
They're throwing wet towels on top of the engine. The stuff that
shut it off.
Yeah. The stuff they had to do and figure out, what percentage to run it at of nitro and methanol. But nitromethane is extremely corrosive. Well, the carburetors are just pot metal, so they chrome plated those to keep them from getting eaten up. And the Jeep cans, they chrome plated those as well. And the nitromethane used to come in like a gallon glass bottle, and they'd put that in a cardboard box, and then they'd take it and dump it into the Jeep can, and they'd just shake the daylights out of it. And every night they would put something different as an additive in there. And Bobby was telling me everything that they did changed the color of the flame in the tailpipe. They used oil of merbane, and they used, just
and all those other
all this crazy stuff. It's orange one night and it's green the next night, and it's none of these guys could figure out what it was for quite some period of time. But there was a red and a blue midget series, and the blue series were all the offies, and the red series were everything else. I mean, outboard motors and you name it. Well, basically, they had no competition with the V860 with the nitromethane, so they petitioned USAC and said, we'd like to be challenged here, So anyway, they finally relented, and they let them run Thanksgiving night, the Turkey Night Grand Prix, and that was with Roger Ward driving the car. And
who won the Indy 500 later in the 50s? Yeah.
Absolutely. And started on the pole, led all 50 laps, and but the V860 had such torque, and they had all this other trick stuff. It had the first Harman & Collins magneto, had serial number 001.
Wow.
But it had a Casale rear end in it. Casale made V-drives for boats.
Okay.
It was a 2-speed rear axle. Well, not something that you could shift back and forth, but you could start in low range and then upshift it. Well, the little 60 had much more torque than a offie. So
they would just jump off the corners.
Well,
right?
Roger Ward could drag them down at the start really, really slow, and none of these offies could go that, so they'd keep jumping the start, and it'd go around and around and get everybody grouped up again. And so finally they got a start, and Roger pulled them like 4 or 5 cars the first straightaway, and that was that.
That was right? Yeah, yeah. Great stuff.
Definitely
Great
history.
Stuff.
The only V860 ever to beat an offie.
Ever beat offie.
So one of the things I like to do is always assemble an engine with ARP bolts, and it's not just because they're sponsors, but because it really does work. And the stuff is fantastic. I never have to worry about it. Steve, you building cars too?
Yeah, actually, it's part of my baseline design plan when I'm building a car that's going to be shown or featured in a magazine. It's part of the plan to have that little bit of diamonds all over the engine bay or in the suspension.
Yeah, the stuff is beautiful. I remember a long time ago, I built the first time I ever touched it, 69 Z28. All of the water jacket holes had stripped out, and I learned about ARP studs.
So check them out at arp-bolts.com or check out their catalog. You'll find everything you're looking for.
And then there's so many other stories, but I want to do specifically stuff from, your guys' experiences with Edelbrock itself. So is there like a great story? I've heard some stuff about the dyno, but
I'm going to tell you a totally different story that I don't think you heard. Mike probably has when we would talk at lunch or breaks.
Yeah.
When I worked at Service Center, the owner of Service Center was Sheldon Comblett.
Okay.
We had like 48 stores, local speed shop, before Super Shops era.
Yeah.
And Edelbrock was in El Segundo. Well, I was working at the Manchester store in Inglewood.
Okay.
Well, the two got together, Vic Edelbrock and Sheldon, and he said, hey, let's have a softball game. Edelbrock versus Service Center.
Wow.
So we met at, I think it was on Rosecrans near Crenshaw, that park where the golf course, it was where he played softball. Kurt Hooker was there.
Okay.
I don't believe Mike was there.
Yeah.
No.
But I was there. And so we had this big softball game, Edelbrock versus Edelbrock. And the one thing
Edelbrock versus Service Center.
And and the one thing that sticks out in my mind is we had a grapefruit with a whole can of white shoe polish that's absorbed in this grapefruit. And we pitched this to Vic Edelbrock. He swings and hits it. And
it explodes, right?
Explodes with grapefruit. Kurt Hooker remembered that when we were talking. But that was, I think, 1975.
Yeah.
So that's a different story than you might know. But,
we
had a blast.
That's good.
Softball on the weekend.
Yeah. So Vic's collection got pretty substantial, and you ended up basically taking care of it, correct?
Yeah, 35 cars and like a half a dozen motorcycles.
And if we have to pick one car, I have my favorite. What was your favorite of all the race cars?
None.
None of them? Like it.
That's a better answer.
That is a really good answer.
I did.
Because people ask me, they say, you love working on cars. Not really. You know, I don't love working them. I love playing with them. I love racing them. But I don't really love working them because it's a real pain and your knuckles are all messed up. So
We did 18 races one year.
Oh, my goodness.
Times 4 and 5 cars a weekend. And the bulk of that I did by myself. And that's driving
the transporter,
the rig to an event.
And how many cars in the rig? 6?
4.
4. Okay.
Yeah. And setting up the awning and dealing with multiple egos and basically get your foot in it or your ass out of it. And, you know, I mean, all of his...
So the 4 cars that he would take to track would be the Yunick Camaro and the Boss 302 Trans Am Mustang.
Yeah.
The Fulmer car, right?
Yeah, the Bud Moore car.
The Bud Moore car.
Z06.
And then the Corvette.
Right.
And then the Lister.
Yeah, well, those were all the Vics, and then the girls had their Shelbys.
The Shelbys, okay.
So it was a matter of how much fun he wanted to have and how much fun he wanted his kids to have. So
True story.
And that kind of went like this.
all the time.
All the time. So, and then now you've got a car too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we did a story on that thing, but talk about that car, because that car has a really cool
history. Because I knew that car before I knew he was going to get it. I knew the guy that had it, and we've talked about it.
Yeah.
Tell him a story, Mike.
So the story is great, and we'll plug some photos in here of the cars, because it's a great story.
It's its current livery has 64 sheet metal on it, but it's a Ford Falcon Sprint, and 63 and a half. When the hardtop came out, 64 and 5, the greenhouse or the roof is all the same. So the man that owned and campaigned the car was our next door neighbor. And my dad worked for Carroll Shelby at the time, and this sedan class was just coming into being with the SCCA.
A sedan.
Yeah.
A sedan and B sedan.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, they had A, B, C, D sedans.
Okay.
So anything from a Sunbeam Imp to a Mustang or a Falcon. Or, anyway, that's basically the genesis of where it started. And
And he was racing it in like B sedan, correct?
A sedan.
A sedan.
Yeah.
Okay.
And from the sedan class is where SCCA got the idea for the professional series of the Trans Am.
Right.
Because the regular sedan class was strictly an amateur series, and the Trans Am paid you money, so that was an okay deal for
right. And your neighbor was doing the development work on the he raced the car, but he was also doing development work for somebody else, wasn't he?
Well, at the time that he was campaigning the car, Shelby had signed the deal with Ford Motor Company to build the GT350s, the Mustangs, and Shelby wanted to get, because the Mustang was still in tooling, it hadn't even been produced yet.
Right.
But Shelby wanted to get kind of a boots on the ground and figure out, okay, what do we got to do and what have you. Well, Ford basically told him, well, the Falcon has the same underpinnings, the same wheelbase, the same
front suspension,
all of that.
Right.
So they had Shelby had gotten a car from Alan Mann, who was Ford's associate in Europe and in England, and they ran lots of rallies and that kind of stuff. Anyway, they ran the Monte Carlo rally and finished second.
That was a big deal in Europe. Huge deal.
Yeah, in 63 they finished second. So in 64 they figured, okay, well, we're just going to load up the FIA, the homologation papers, and I mean, they homologated the car with Girling brakes and 2 carburetors and body panels of pressed alloy, pressed composite.
This thing way up, right?
Lowered its weight by 400 pounds.
400 pounds.
So that was a big deal for.
Sure.
You tell any racer that, okay, all you got to do is change a few body panels and you could make your car 400 pounds lighter. Well,
they're going to do that.
That's what Pete, our neighbor, did. So he and my dad at night bodied that car up from a 63 to a 64.
Right.
And so anyway, that's
kind of round a square.
Yeah, exactly.
But my car was used in development for one of the things that they did with the Shelbys was relocate the upper control arm down, which
to change the camber curve.
Yeah, and also more caster and all that kind of stuff. So my car actually has 3 sets of holes.
Really?
And so you could see where they were plotting stuff out. And I left them there when I restored the car because it's some of the history of the car.
Sure,
so,
absolutely. But
kind of fun. The last race of the first year of that series in 1966 was at Riverside, and Pete, our neighbor that owned the car, was Riverside was like his home racetrack, and so Shelby paid his entry to put another Ford in the field because Ford was behind in points to Chrysler
for the manufacturers championship.
Right. So anyway, started fourth.
Something new.
Started fourth and finished 6th. Had an alternator fail on it, and they changed the alternator, but it scored points and helped Ford win the championship in '66.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
But it's just a little privateer car. But boy, if it could talk,
the stories it could tell, right?
It has some great stories.
And then you eventually bought it. You eventually bought the car.
Yeah, I followed it around for a long time, and it actually the guy that had it was up here in Moore Park, I guess. Yeah.
Okay.
This way.
Yeah.
And I told him he actually had bought the Washburn Corvette after they were done racing it along with Bob Jank.
Okay.
And that's the story I was telling you when they took it to Bonneville and with a 671 supercharger on it, it went 200 miles an hour.
Which is just astonishing because those Stingray Corvettes were so famous for just picking the front ends up and flying. I mean, the funny cars, they crashed them all over the place. Yeah.
How many years ago was that?
And that was 50 years ago? Yeah.
But they're on the phone talking to GM Engineering and telling them that they're in Wendover and they're trying to get this car to go faster than it was like 188 miles an hour and it wouldn't go any faster. And the guys are going, that car was never designed to do that.
What are you doing?
So anyway, they by just chipping away at it, they got it to 202.
Wow.
But yeah, pretty crazy. But But anyway, Mark Dees, who was a half owner in the Corvette, he had my car and
Customer Service Center.
There you go. That's his relationship.
That's how I knew him.
But I had followed the car around, and Mark wound up coming in possession of it, and he had taken it to Europe and raced it over there as a Group 2 car and done some stuff with it. Pretty successful attorney. And anyway, so I told him, I said, hey, if you ever get to the point of selling the car, and so.
Sure, because there's a direct connection. I mean, your dad's friend and your neighbor, and you knew the car as well as anybody.
My mom has a picture of me sitting in the car at about 7 years old.
Really? Oh, that's great. Wow. Yeah.
But anyway, so Mark calls me up and he goes, okay, I'm ready to sell that car, and I want $90,000 for it. And I had just bought a house, and I said,
that's like,
I really appreciate you thinking of me, but I can't get there. So So anyway, he called me like Thanksgiving time, and so Bob Yunick, who was a friend of the company and a confidant of Vic Jr.'s and what have you, he called me up and he says, so where are you at on your car? And I told him, I said, well, I can't afford it. And, but Mark did call, and he says, oh, well, you haven't heard. And I said, no. And he says, well, Mark was killed in a traffic accident. This was Christmas week. He was hit head on by a drunk driver. So anyway, and I said, well, he says, well, just hang on. So I get a phone call from Mark's daughter and saying, my godfather Bob told me to call you and that you're interested in the car. And I said, well, yeah, I kind of sort of am. And she says, well, I have another party that's interested in also, and he offered this for it. And I said, okay, so let's see. I can sell this and I can borrow that and I can
rob a few banks and
okay. So it goes back and forth like 3 times. And I told her, I said, look, I said, I appreciate you thinking of me and everything else. I said, but I can't get there from here. And so we kind of left it at that. And So a couple weeks go by, and she calls me again, and she says, well, I thought about it, and I thought about it with my godfather, Bob, and if you can pay your last offer, we'd like you to have the car.
Very cool. Yeah. So when was this?
A 94, I think.
So you've had the car almost 30 years.
Oh, I couldn't afford to do anything to it but take it apart, you know, I mean.
He was too busy taking care of Vic's car.
Yeah, well, that also.
Yeah, that was a full-time job, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's pretty hard when money is no object when you work on stuff 12 hours a day, and then you go home and you're going, I can get a little more out of this.
Right, right. I can squeeze some life out of this piece, right? Yeah. That's great. Yeah, and that's a fun car. It really is a fun car.
Oh, it's a first-year car, so they ran 7-inch wheels is where the rest of the cars run 8-inch wheels, which is a big difference on how the tire works.
Oh, yeah.
And I chose to run it with the smaller engine in it, even though the Trans Am rules are 5 liters, which is 305 inches.
So you chose to do the 289.
Yeah, because 90% of the time the car ran in a sedan, and that's the engine that it, plus that was the crank that I had. So anyway, but it's kind of like taking a knife to a gunfight. So
We'd like to introduce you to a new sponsor of ours. This is InTheGarageMedia.com. Some friends of ours that were in the print magazine business before and now started their own books. We got All Chevy Performance, Classic Truck Performance, and Modern Rotting.
Yeah, these are awesome books. They've got lots of educational and entertainment things in them, and they're even good enough quality to include Steve Strope quality vehicles.
Maybe.
He's
we'll
working
see if
up
I'm
to
allowed in there.
That's right.
I don't know.
So In the Garage Media, InTheGarageMedia.com. Check them out.
Check them out.
Get your subscription, sit and read it. And with ARP, it's not just a lot of intake manifolds, studs for heads, but they also have a humongous selection of American and metric that we use all throughout the car, even large bolts that we use on the suspension components, because you want that same strength, that same durability and reliability, plus the beautiful looks.
And stuff outside the catalog.
Right. They have a special order program where if you're a builder and you need some special stuff made, they can do that for you. So it's an amazing, amazing company to work with.
So check them out at arp-bolts.com or check out their catalog. You'll find everything you're looking for.
And the current crop of vintage Trans Am racing is not exactly completely the way it was in 1968 or 9 or 70, right?
To a certain degree, you know. I mean, but there's stuff that's not sourceable anymore. I mean, we have AMCs. We have like a half a dozen of those cars, and Challengers and Barracudas and Dodge Darts.
And those parts are getting hard to find.
Well, especially for those guys. You know, I mean, Ford or Chevy, I mean, it's more plentiful, although.
Then you got guys like Jay Biddle out there running tunnel port heads, right? Which is just insane, spinning the snot out of that thing. It's an amazing engine. It's,
Didn't Sam Posey drive the Chrysler and they de-stroked the 340 to 305?
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
I remember that car. I remember.
Yeah. So
going to Riverside as a young guy in the 60s, that was fun too.
Yeah. Watching the stock cars run.
Petty ran a Ford that one year at Riverside.
Yep, 69, right?
See?
Yep.
So we all have good memories. Goosebumps come with them.
And you built a couple of cars, right?
Say again?
You've built a couple of cars.
Oh, well, yeah. I like going straight, fast, quarter mile.
Cool. So what's your current hot rod?
I have a hot rod, which is like a 37 Ford pickup, you know, and then I've got, I have so much fun driving this 64 Chevy 2 gasser wagon.
Okay.
Straight axle.
I don't think I've seen that car.
Tunnel ram.
Yeah.
Two Edelbrock carburetors.
Two Edelbrock, of course.
Sticking to the hood with a 5-speed, and it's a street car. So I drive it, and when I worked at Edelbrock display trailer, like at Good Guys Del Mar, Bakersfield, Pomona, I drive it and park it there because it's got all our product to showcase our product while I'm working.
Yeah.
And it's fun to drive.
Yeah.
Fun to drive.
Yeah.
With a 5-speed, I feel like I'm 17 again. You've always been a manual trans guy yourself.
Exactly.
Too.
Oh, yeah. 4 speeds forever.
So it's, I love them.
Yeah.
It's fun.
So you have AVS2s on it?
Of course.
Of course, yeah.
The new AVS2.
The new AVS2.
Annular flow primary boosters.
Yeah, which was Kurt Hooker's deal, right?
God bless Kurt.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. That was a fun deal. I remember going down there one day to do a story on probably ProFlow 3 or 4, something like that.
Well, we put one on your El Camino.
We put one on the El Camino, yes. And so I show up, and Kurt comes out. I go in the dyno and say hello and all that kind of stuff. And he goes, "Hey, come with me right now." Okay. Sticks me in that was it green or the Chevy pickup truck?
Blue.
The blue one.
Blue.
And drive this thing. I want your impression. And I go, about what? He goes, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to color your opinion. Just tell me what you feel.
Just drive it.
I've never driven this before. He goes, doesn't matter. Just take it out and drive it. So I drive around about half an hour. I come back, and he goes, what do you think? And I went, man, it's got some really sharp throttle response. I mean, I'm impressed. I would, if I didn't know better, having opened the hood before we left and knew it was a carburetor, I would have guessed this is fuel injection. And he goes, that's what I wanted to hear. You need to go tell Vic that. And it's like, okay. And because he didn't believe it. But what Kurt had done was an annular discharge booster, right? Yep. And put it in the AVS, and it transformed that carburetor. Oh, it was amazing.
It's about the last addition you could do to an AFB carburetor would be the annular booster.
Yeah. And with an annular
that.
booster, what you have is a round booster. Instead of a normal booster has
a dog leg
kind of thing, and it has one discharge hole. But annular will use 8 holes all the way around, and it better vaporizes the fuel. And it also responds quicker to throttle input. So with my test, what I did was I put I had a TPS. I fixed a TPS to the carburetors so I could read throttle position. Right. And then what I did was, you could do it with a vacuum gauge the same way, but essentially I did a light acceleration with another carburetor, and then that wasn't an annular booster carburetor, and then slapped the AVS2 on and accelerated the same way and looked at the position of the TPS, and the throttle position was like 3 or 4 or 5% different. So it was essentially not having to give it as much throttle to do the same thing. This sounds like an ad, but it was absolutely true.
It atomized the fuel coming out of the booster instead of below the butterfly.
So snappy, yeah, and it was astonishing. And the sad part is that you can describe this 100 different ways to tell people all this stuff, but unless you drive it, you're really never going to know. So, but that was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun,
Absolutely.
And what it harked back to was when McFarland did the 2101 and the intake manifold and the carburetor combination, the performer package, and it was actually supposed to be for a 350, right? And I told him, I said, I want to do the story on this thing because I knew what was coming. I was down there all the time,
right?
And but all I had was literally a 287 in my Chevelle at the time, because we'd blown the big block up, so we had this lame little 283 in there it was a 40 over 283, so it was actually a 289. And Jim says, well, we really designed this for a 350, but if you want to do it, then let's try it, see what happens. And it transformed that thing. I made it run so good. It was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, that was Kurt's doing. God bless him.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yep. So
what a difference. And we can't make them fast enough today.
Yeah.
It is good.
Yeah.
It works.
And those were fun times. And that created that whole line of camshafts and eventually cylinder heads. I got another great hooker story. So you guys came out with the aluminum cylinder head for the small block Chevy, 23-degree head. And so I called up, Losi, who was probably the magazine
exactly
the guy at Edelbrock, right?
Yeah.
And I said, let's do a story. And Rod Sokolowski was there, another guy that we've lost. And so we came up with this idea to do. I'll port, and I'll do it myself. I'll port a set of iron heads. I'll have Rod show me how to do it, and he had all the facilities down there. And I'll port these. So we ran it first on the dyno. We took it at 350, and we put the stock heads on it. Then we ported the heads. And then we're going to put the aluminum heads on, right? And everybody says, yeah, that sounds like a great idea, right? So I go in there, we run the thing baseline, pull the heads off, and Rod shows me how to do this thing, and I'm in there for 8 hours. It took me forever, iron porting, just pocket porting a set of iron heads, right?
Boy.
The insides of my nostrils were black for a week. It was great. And
Absolutely.
So we get all done, and so like the next day I'm down there, and we pop the heads on, right? And we put the manifold back on. Everything is exactly the same except for whatever the porting I did, right? And this is essentially Rod Sokolowski stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And so Kurt pulls the handle, and it picked up 27 horsepower. And Kurt goes, uh-oh. And I'm looking at him like, no, man, we made 27 horsepower. And he goes, I'm not sure we can do that with those aluminum heads. And I said, whoa. No, you know what this will do on a base 350, right? And he goes, what makes you say that? And I said, but you've tested this, right?
Yeah, test number one coming up.
What makes you say that? I was like, no. He goes, no, the boss won't spend the money to find out just how good they are. So we're about to find out. And I'm thinking, uh-oh. You know, because what happens if my Rod Sokolowski ported heads are better than your after? I don't have a story, right? It's like, uh-oh. You know, so Kurt says, well, there's one way to find out. Pop those things off there, slam those heads on there. We set it all up. He pulled the handle. We made 54 more horsepower over the base, or another 27. Another
awesome.
27. I'll never forget those numbers. And Kurt goes, oh, man.
Yeah, no kidding.
And then that part was not in the story that we did. It was just the other stuff. And I was proud as hell, you know, when I made 27 horsepower. And I thought it would all be on the intake side. And we flowed them, obviously, before and after as well. That was part of my story. And all the improvements were on the exhaust side. You know, that's where all the horsepower
That was the
came from.
beginning of the total power package.
Yes, absolutely. You know, so it was interesting that we were all involved with this whole thing all the way through and see how it's evolved over the years.
God.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. You talk about these stories we have, and when you go somewhere, like I remember taking one of our old sales managers to a Ford dealer to drop off his truck and lunch, and he sees we have Edelbrock on, and he goes, so how's the manifold business? But that's what the company started out as.
Sure.
Because Vic
exactly.
Sr. made that slingshot in 38.
Yep, for the flatheads.
But we're so much more than just a
And the
manifold.
company started out of his gas station.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Dennis Boulevard.
Yeah, just amazing stuff. And and then would go down there and just watch these line of manifolds going. They go, where are all of these things going? You know,
we used to say that they would pay to have a survey done, and they'd stop 200 cars on the street, and they might find one product, but I mean, we had one machine that the transfer line, or the Frankenstein that we called it. It just made the 2101 and the 7101,
which was the original dual plane that was really the popular
it was
one.
done in a cube
that was
or a square,
manifold, right?
And there'd be 23 stations, Mike, or 19, I forget.
I'm not sure.
Right around there, around 20 different, because it would do one op and move, and but when it got going, it was every 2-3 minutes a manifold would come off the line.
Yeah,
it would produce a couple thousand manifolds
just
a week.
Astonishing.
Yeah, and that's one machine. And you just where does this stuff go?
Before CNCs.
Way
before.
Oh yeah. So each individual station, you're drilling the holes, you're tapping the ports and doing all that stuff. The vacuum ports.
And that machine was transferred from El Segundo to Torrance.
Yeah.
Because it was in between two buildings in El Segundo.
Yeah. Wow.
And we
had
put
to walk
it inside.
around it.
Yeah.
A good time.
So, and then Vic also had Smokey Yunick's Camaro.
Yep.
And I came down and worked with you on that story that we did, and to this day I missed out on the one thing, because you said, well, what we really should do is park the Yunick Camaro next to a stock 67 Camaro, because that's when you really see
Hot Rod Magazine
how
car,
right? Yeah, and how cheated up that car really was, right?
Absolutely.
Because he laid the A pillars back, right?
Yep. Yeah, I mean it had so much stuff manipulated on it, but that was Smokey Yunick and his MO, and
Sure.
But it looked like a stock Camaro.
It did, but it wasn't.
It
and
wasn't.
you said that he drooped the nose?
Yeah, that was kind of standard fare for like the Bud Moore car is drooped an inch. The Penske car, which is in my shop right now, is drooped an inch. But it was interesting looking at the different methods of how to approach that. The way Penske did it was they ran the core support through a bandsaw and took an inch out of it and welded it back together. Well, the way that Smokey did it was where the core support attached to the front subframe rail, he dropped it there.
Just
his theory was these cars are not likely to compete in multiple races without having some body damage, and if we could take a part out of a box versus
and quickly modify it. Okay.
Versus having to massage a part.
And that was his genius, wasn't it?
And when you droop the front end of one of those cars, it splits the door and the fender gap at the top.
And compress it at the bottom.
Right. So How Penske did it was they added material to the back of the fender. Smokey added it to the doors so that you didn't have to modify the fender to bolt it on. I mean, you still had to do the wheel flare, but you know, just trying to look at saving some time here and there.
Right.
But,
and then didn't he do a modification in order to change the disc brake pads, where he had a vacuum? Wasn't it a canister?
Yeah, that was developed
Headlight canister
by Bill Howell, who worked for GM. And the problem, the inherent problem is they didn't have the disc pad material that we have today, and running like the 12 hours of Sebring or the 24 hours of Daytona, the pads wouldn't last. So you come in on a pit stop, and the way that engineer designed that caliper, it has a spring behind the piston. So you pull the pad out, and the spring pushes the piston out. And it's a lip seal, it's not a square seal. So when you try and push the piston back in, it rolls the seal over,
now
and it just pushes air into
the system.
So you got a dead pedal, and so Bill Howell came up with a system. It was servos and used engine vacuum and a canister that held the vacuum. And
sit in the passenger side.
Yeah.
Basically, what they would do would be the lid of the master cylinder had 2 tubes on it, and they would apply a vacuum to the system. It would suck the pads back, suck the pistons back, so you could change the pads
really quickly, right? Just grab them, throw it in, put the pin back in, right?
Because the Fords or the Chryslers or any of the rest of them, you know, they didn't have these inherent problems with springs and lip seals and all that. So, but that car has that system on it, and I made it work. And just some of the, was it necessary to do as much inquisitive on my part on how does it work?
How do you make this work? Yeah, exactly.
And Bill Howell was still around at the time, and he sent me schematics and all kinds of stuff. So it was kind of fun.
So the driver had to pull a switch, right? He had to pull a lever in order to apply the vacuum to the master cylinder. Yeah.
But those control arms aren't Camaro control arms. You know, it had a 9-inch Ford with a rear diff cover.
You showed me that too. Yeah, it's got a 9-inch Ford rear end, but with a 12-bolt small block or 12-bolt cover over the back of it. Yeah.
A lot of Smokey's heritage is roundy round and stock car stuff. So
right.
You could see that just in looking at the car. It had a lot of left side weight in it. You know, the oil remote and you know, a lot of the other stuff was all set to the left. So, but you know, the 9-inch Ford was standard stock car stuff, and he was pissed because at the time GM was developing that car. You know, of course, it's, you know, race on Sunday, sell on Monday, that adage and what have you. But what they wanted was to basically people to see these cars and you know, hopefully buy one.
Right.
But
little did you know that the Camaro that you were buying off the show had nothing to do with the car that was on the track, other than this vague silhouette.
But Smokey was of the opinion that Penske was getting parts from GM Engineering that he wasn't. So that's why the 9-inch rear end went in it. I mean, the subframe is Z'd, and I mean, the drip rails are pulled into the body, and it just goes on and on and on. It has super stock drag race glass in it, which is the back glass and all the side glass, which is 1/8 inch rather than 3/16. You know, I mean, it just a phenomenal amount of modifications.
So when you see that car, when you see pictures of it, you know, it's not a stock 67 Camaro by any means. So, but just some great stuff, and all the innovative things he did, you know, just amazing.
Crazy. I mean, we at the same time had the McFarland's car, the hot rod Camaro, you know, the test car. And,
right, which was the first Camaro on the West Coast, right? Yep.
And, you know, I would look at that and look at this.
Yeah, that's a fun story too. That car, because Chevrolet brought that Camaro out to the West Coast, gave it to Hot Rod Magazine. Jim McFarland was the editor at that time, And
probably late of 66, roughly. Yeah,
66. It was a pre-production car.
It was a pre-production car, essentially a prototype.
Yeah, hand-built car.
Hand-built car, and then took it around to all the manufacturers. Hooker to build headers and
Shifter,
and Schiefer to build a clutch and all this other
Edelbrock
stuff.
manifold.
And then so a very, very famous car. And then ended up drag racing it. And then there's do you know the story about Jim racing it when they took it to the Winter Nationals?
He ran it at Bakersfield too with a big block. I think.
And the parachute deal and almost crashed the car.
Mike might know better.
Yeah, pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah.
That car still has on the inner fenders when it had the big block in it, it had a Hooker header on the thing, and they were like 2-inch primaries. But the number 3 cylinder, there was not room to get 4 pipes between the engine and the frame rail, so the third pipe on both sides went out through the outside the frame rail and then back in again.
And then
back in again. And when we restored the car, I left those there and just put rubber, like the rubber flappers that are where the upper A-arms are and that kind of stuff, just to keep the debris out of the engine compartment. But, it's all part of the car's story. And
then Jim bought that car and then kept it for a number of years.
It was supposed to go to the crusher, I thought, right?
Yeah, it was, because it was a prototype, and somehow they managed to, I guess it probably wasn't a prototype, it was more like you said, pre-production. But then he ended up with the car, and now it's in the collection, right?
Yeah, Jim and Herb Fischel were very good friends, and that's how Jim was able to acquire the car. After it was out here for the period of time that it was, it went back to GM, and it was disassembled, and at that time, the production line was up, and the car was ran back through the assembly line.
That's how they did it. Okay.
It had deluxe interior door panels.
There's it has some stuff on it that a regular production car doesn't, like in the C-pillars and on the interior. It has 2 dome lights there rather than a single.
Really?
Really? It has some kind of cool stuff as far as that goes.
Yeah. So
in terms of red,
yes, absolutely.
In
terms of provenance, red. It doesn't get any more provenance than that. So
super low miles.
Yeah, significant car. Yeah.
It's
a cool
power
piece. To her a couple times.
Yeah. So. We could. There's probably 100 more stories.
I don't know if we have enough time, but we're having fun.
Well, maybe we'll do this again, right? Have you guys back, and we can tell some more stories, and maybe some of them will actually be true.
I got 33 more.
So I want to thank these guys for coming out and hanging out with us, and want to thank our ARP for helping us out with this whole package, and keep watching, and we'll keep cranking these babies out.